Recording. Hello, Stephen. Welcome to the show. It's so great to see you.
It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Hey, so I like to start off when I know people, not through me randomly DMing people. How do we know each other?
Wasn't it Monique that kind of connected with us,
That,
right? I got
that's
Instagram.
right.
I think I got a message with I think Dr. Euphemia maybe, and
Yes.
so yeah, so we kind of got connected that way, and I was a guest on hers
Mhm.
on Monique's podcast. Yeah.
Yes. Monique Farouk, who is also a friend of our podcast and host of Infertility and Me, thought you and I needed to connect, which I love. I love for as much as I wish that I could get off Instagram sometimes, I love the opportunities to build the connections and meet the people that I have. So it's definitely
Yeah.
very yes and.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you get in? How did you decide to get into mental health?
Is interesting because I think it more chose me rather than me choosing it.
Mm-hmm.
When I graduated in 2009 I had a master's degree in experimental psych. Um, my plan was to go to get a PhD,
Sure.
and this was right around the turn of the recession, and everybody was going back to school, and um, applied for 5 different schools and didn't get into any. So, um, yeah, my wife had a job out in Virginia. We got married in August, right after I graduated, and moved out to Virginia with no job. My wife had a job teaching, and my wife had talked about working for this agency, working with teenagers, and I thought she was out of her mind. Like, I'm like, me, like of all people working with this population, never would have thought it, because my whole goal was to do research, and the research I did was not even remotely close to social work. So yeah, so long story short, I ended up getting a job with that agency, and has basically been in the field of social work ever since. So
Wow. That's amazing. And that what an interesting story too about like a recession hits and lots of people decide to go back to school. That makes sense. But the flooding of the applications and all of that. And so it's funny how the universe redirects our feet sometimes.
yeah,
Yeah.
multiple times,
Yeah.
oftentimes, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I honestly fell in love with it. I love the field. I love what we do, just as a whole of social work, of getting in there at macro level to mezzo and even micro level, work and stuff. I just, our profession does such a phenomenal job with interacting with people. And yeah, I love it, and, couldn't, find myself doing something else.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so tell us all about the men's helpline.
Yeah, so that got started. Oh, I think Daniel Landau, who is the founder, started in about 2021. Um, I started getting more active on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I want to say that we connected on LinkedIn, and we had done a panel discussion with somebody that we mutually knew, like in Australia, and ended up like later on, like a few weeks later, he asked Weber if I wanted to be like a board member, and he said like, "This is what we're." Giving me the spiel of what we wanted to do. And I'm like, this is exactly numero uno on my list. And I literally have a list that's literally right up here that says nonprofit for male like infertility.
Amazing.
So what Men's Helpline actually is trying to accomplish is it's reducing the stigma of male infertility, but it's also changing the way that men have been receiving support. So we are in the works of developing like a peer-to-peer network. So connecting with a guy that's already gone through infertility or like miscarriage, pregnancy loss, and connecting them with the guy that's currently in it. So you don't have that misconception of infertility and miscarriage and stuff. Like you have a guy that's already connected and knows like what that's like. Now, everybody's, story is obviously different, but it's really about getting to the fact that like, hey, we've been there. Like everybody on our board has had some sort of infertility or miscarriage. And, often we're considered a silent partner. Women, get the support as they should. Like they have the physical piece of it, the emotional piece, men, like we have the emotional piece. And honestly, there's times where we felt very helpless, and not knowing how to support like our partners, putting our grief like on the back burner while we're trying to manage and be a supportive, partner and everything. Mm-hmm. So Daniel had that experience, like they've had, they did IVF for, genetic reasons, and, had the experience of, they had ended up having a miscarriage, and his former supervisor had basically said like, well, we still need you to work. And was very dismissive of the whole experience. And that really was like the catalyst for him, was like, like this needs to change, like we need to make sure that, men are getting the support that they need, and that's kind of our mission. Our mission is really to kind of change the support, that men receive, but also reducing the stigma, making it okay to talk about infertility and miscarriage and loss.
Absolutely. It's really interesting. And I expand some to all non-birthing partners, no matter what the situation is, through adoption, IVF, a surrogate, same-sex couples, or, all of that. To say, though, it really is interesting how far we have to go for birthing people in physical and mental support, and how much that partner gets overlooked. I've had a number of guests I've been very lucky to have on the show, and we talk about birth trauma and all of the things that go on. And a lot of times they'll mention their partners. They wheeled the baby off one way, they wheeled me off the other, and they left my husband standing in the delivery room by himself for an hour, for hours, for who knows, whatever. And there's no explanation, there's no support, there's no awareness. You're talking about a pregnancy loss, the death of someone's child, and they're like, no, I'm gonna need to see you on Monday. It seems so 1 + 1 = 2 to me, that you would give somebody time for grief and bereavement, and yet here we are not being able to experience that at all.
And it's not even in hospital settings either. Like it's within families, like I've had conversations, like with one of my former coworkers, like husbands. We were out for a drink because it was like my last day. And we, kind of started talking about like the podcast that I've done. And he was like, what, honestly, he's like, it wasn't until like his wife talked to his brother and his wife were going through IVF, and they've had 4 transfers, none of them took. And he said, like, the whole time I never even thought to ask my brother, like how he was doing. It took his wife to ask, the brother, say, how are you doing? And it kind of took him, he stepped back a little bit. He's like, wow, I've never even thought to even ask him how he was doing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We don't give men the space. We don't give them like the time to talk, to say it, and this is not to like discount like the support that, women, deserve all the support and that they need. And, often they'll see it as like, men versus, men's support is different, right? We don't see a lot of men wanting to go to groups, and going to the therapy, which I will honestly say, like, it is definitely worth it for sure to go to therapy, but
yes,
not all men are comfortable with that, so we were kind of looking at like, what's better way can we give them the support, make sure like they're not feeling alone in this, and really like connecting them with someone that's already gone through it, that gets it. Mm-hmm. We feel like that is going to be a game changer for some men, to be able to bounce ideas off, find those little tricks, the trade, of how do you afford this? Like, how, not every state has mandated coverage.
Yeah. Right.
So it's like finding those little tricks of like budgeting, like when my wife and I did IVF, we took out a zero interest credit card for 24 months, and that's how we paid for meds. All right. So we just literally would charge it, and then we would pay.
Say it again. Say it again for the cheap seats in the back. I'm just kidding. There are no cheap seats. Everyone is welcome here on the podcast. But say it again, because I don't think people understand how expensive IVF is. They're like, oh, you can't get pregnant? Just do IVF. That magically assures you a baby. It is obviously, you did what? Now say it again.
Yeah. So like we took out a zero interest credit card
Yes.
for a 24-month zero interest, and basically got that just to pay for meds, because our meds were at least $2,000-3,000, a piece, and then we did four rounds of egg banking. So that's like 4 months. So you think that's like 12,000. And, we also had, the luxury of my aunt basically using her inheritance money for my grandparents was the exact amount that we needed for IVF. And she basically just transferred the money to us and has never asked for a cent back.
Wow.
So, in social work, we all know we're not making six figures, and as a teacher, she's not making six figures either. So it was really the only way that we could afford it. And that took a long time, for us to be able to, kind of accept that and be okay with it.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness, absolutely. Well, and to speak to a point that you made earlier, it's kind of, they talk about like, I'm gonna butcher this, and I'd like to apologize, but I feel like it bears mentioning. The expression is like, equity and social justice is not, just having more for one person doesn't mean less for somebody else. It's not pie. And I absolutely butchered that, but I think everyone is like, oh yeah, I know what she's talking about, even though she butchered it. But that's the same thing here with support for people going through fertility struggles. Obviously, we want to have that for the birthing person. Obviously, of course. And that doesn't mean giving some to men is taking any away from the woman. And it certainly doesn't mean oh, well, we've got to focus on the women, and therefore the men just need to, suck it up, tough it out on their own. It's not pie.
No.
There is space for all of it. And I do know that we speak intentionally about acknowledging the situations other people have gone through in fertility, trying to conceive, pregnancy loss, and all of that. And we don't participate in the trauma Olympics. We do not. And also making sure that we are able to say, like, and also birthing partners are going through it, and they need support and help, and to destigmatize and all of that.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you said that, because it's exactly how, like at Men's Helpline, that's how we view it, right? It's an addition. It's not to take away from any of the support, whether that like women are receiving, is really an addition. And honestly, like the addition helps the couple overall, right? I mean, if men's mental health, if they have better ways of coping with the stress of seeing their partners distressed, and the psychological distress that they could see. I mean, male factor infertility, men are more likely to have depression and anxiety, with that diagnosis. So if you think about it, like offering men support is offering support for the couple.
100%. I mean, you can't be your most loving, supportive, attentive, aware partner if, we say all the time, you can't pour from an empty cup. And if you are finding yourself to not be in a supportive space and feeling supported yourself, how can you be as supportive and communicative and empathetic and compassionate for everything else that's going on? And so that really is kind of the crux of it, figuring. We talk a lot about how it takes a village, and it's like, we're not necessarily focusing on the two main people in your village. We got to start there.
I mean, it's a couple's issue. I mean, when you think about if men aren't willing, there's so many men that have talked about how they don't feel that they can give their burdens over to their partner because they're already stressed.
Yes.
Like as men, we don't want to add to the stress, and that's not a great way of doing it. But I mean, that's the mentality, is like, we don't want to add stress to an already stressful situation. So we just basically keep mom in this like status quo, keep going on.
Yeah.
But oftentimes when men do that, women will come back and say, like, my husband or my partner, non-burden partner, like, does not care.
Yes.
And it's not the case. Men aren't talking about it, but it's not because they don't care. It's because they don't want to add stress, right?
Right.
And when you're going through infertility, and like I completely 100% agree with you, like it takes a village, and support that you get from your partner is different than what you would get from your parents, right? Compared to a friend. I mean, like there's all different kinds of support that, you know, one gets when going through this.
Right.
So it's just, yeah, it needs to happen. You know, like men need to get the support. You know, men need to be able to communicate that, you know, because that helps with like reducing misunderstandings, right?
Right.
So if you have clear communication, positive coping skills with managing the stress and improving the relationship, to me, I think that's a win-win for everyone.
Absolutely. And I've been talking about this a lot. I teach at the University of Kansas in the Graduate Department of Social Welfare and all of this. And we talk about like, it takes a village, but it's like, we don't have in the United States, really, we don't have intergenerational living anymore. Your aunt and your cousin and your grandma and your sister are not right down the street. And the village that they say it takes is not as readily available for people. And so we really need to make sure we're nurturing those sacred spaces that we do have in our partners and in the people who are acutely involved in the situation. So that absolutely needs to be the place that we go. And it's really nice because I do appreciate what you're saying too, to be able to come to your partner, to your wife and say, I'm not doing well, and here's what I'm doing about it, instead of putting that burden on her, which it's not a burden, but the added responsibility.
Yeah.
Let me just, if I may step back out of that for a second. We talk about that a lot. I taught suicidal ideation and self-interest behavior over the summer, and we talk about the burdensomeness that people experience often as a symptom of suicidal ideation. And I said, you know, there's a difference between being a burden and someone's responsibility. Some people have physical ailments, limitations, whatever it might be, that require people to help them, and they are somebody else's responsibility. That doesn't make you a burden. And so by expressing your needs to your wife doesn't make you a burden, but it does, like, she's not just going to be like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, good luck with that. But being able to participate in the things that you're describing, you're saying, look, this is how I'm taking control of the situation the best I can. This is how I'm participating in my mental health. These are the tools that are available to me and the resources. And here's how I can help us to be able to function better. I'm going to be a better partner this way. And I can communicate to you the things that I need that you can help me with. And certainly I can help you with as well. And opening those lines of communication and vulnerability can be so meaningful.
Yeah. And I think one of the key things that I think, and like I said, this is very anecdotal, but like this is my wife and I, but before we even did IVF, like right before, like we knew that if we didn't have anything to occupy our time, we would 100% be focusing on like the infertility, and we would drive each other nuts. So we took a giant leap and decided to like host foreign exchange students. So they came like in August and they left in June. So like all three of the exchange students like saw some piece of IVF.
Fascinating for them.
And honestly though, like, but it was such a game changer for us because we focused on other things, right? I mean, we went to concerts and like sporting events and like just the different, you know, events that they were part of. I mean, we were all in. Like, went to, you know, we traveled and did lots of, you know, different fun stuff, and it allowed us the time to not 100% solely focus on our journey.
Yeah.
You know, it was tough, you know, but I can't imagine how much tougher it would have been like if we didn't have them there. Right.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That is really interesting to me. And again, what an education for them and an opportunity to, these are not things that we are taught here in the States for sure. We're not
No.
taught about like, in fifth grade, we're given a thing of pads and deodorant and we're told about our bodies ish and be about your merry way. But like, we don't talk about ovulation cycles and tracking and fertility and how your body changes and all of these things. And heaven forbid, we actually talk about like the hormones and everything behind all of that. And it's interesting you mentioned that because I'm sure, I don't know how many times y'all have heard this, but I can say for myself and a number of clients and friends, how many times people are like, just stop thinking about it and you'll get pregnant. And it's like, okay, tell me how to stop thinking about it. But you figured it out. Adopt some foreign exchange students. No, I'm kidding. But,
Right.
but that's
Yeah.
you're right, though. Finding meaningful things to participate in and engage in that are outside of the fertility journey can be really helpful.
Yeah. I mean, it was, like I said, for us. I mean, like it gave us other things to focus on. And yes, there were still conversations about like doing IVF. I mean, we went to 3 different clinics and jumped through how many hoops, like, I mean, probably just like everybody else and being the professional hoop jumper. But it was nice though. I mean, it allowed us the opportunity to focus on fun things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if you don't host an exchange student, although it is a very good experience, it is a very good experience. And like, we are going to do it again someday, but
Yeah.
Even if it's not that, like finding something, go on vacation, and I know how easy it is to say like, oh, well, we need to save money and we need to do, we're doing IVF, we're paying for meds. Totally get it. But if you can find ways to go on vacation, like, or do a day trip or something, do it for your own sanity.
I like that. You're saying
Works.
step outside of the routine
Right.
and the day to day. Yeah, I like that very much. Yes. But
Yeah.
also, I mean, looking into all of those different things. And I love that too. And now I'm sitting here like, wow, we have a 2 and a 4-year-old, so absolutely not. But one day I'm like, we should host some foreign exchange students. That would be such a lovely thing. And what a great experience for people to get to participate in that anyway. That's such a unique thing to do. That's really, really very interesting. So I love the tagline, lightening the load women have historically shouldered alone. And I was hoping maybe you could elaborate, like, how did we come up with that? What is the goal there? What does that look like? What steps can we do to help people start that journey?
One of the biggest reasons that we wanted that in our mission statement is because like there is a historical narrative that fertility is a woman's issue.
Right.
And as we all know, like that is not the case, like it is not a 50-50, but it's like a 33, 33 in dual factor, right?
Yes.
I mean, it impacts everyone. It doesn't matter what what race you are, like what social and academic status.
Sure.
I had a guest, Dr. Koo, who's at Dallas IVF, and his phrase is that infertility is an equal opportunity offender. He said it doesn't matter where, like who you are, like it can impact everyone. So we, as Men's Helpline, like we don't want to like be dismissive of the women's, like I said, the women's support that they're getting. But we also recognize that if men are able to speak up more about, hey, I was diagnosed with male infertility, and opening up that conversation, it's like that's going to reduce stigma. And it's also going to change that narrative from, infertility is a woman's issue to infertility is a couple's issue. It's not the woman's fault, right? Because historically that's been what pop culture says is, well, if you guys are struggling with infertility, it's got to be the woman, obviously. Right? So, and I think my theory is that men's egos, right? I mean, are like, well, it can't be me, and at that point in history, right, we didn't have the science and testing, behind it, but I mean, now we do. Like now we recognize that it's both sides, like women can have infertility, men can have infertility, right? So we really want to change that narrative and reduce the stigma. And I think inherently, if we reduce the stigma about talking about male infertility and seeing it as what it is, as a medical issue, to me, I can't even understand why is it stigmatized? Like, this is something that no one's asked for. No one goes in and says like, wow, I really want to do IVF, right? No one does. There are maybe some cases where if people are trying to do like genetic reasons, right? I mean, there are some cases where people do that, but
Certainly.
I think first and foremost, I think people honestly want to have kids naturally and not have to do IVF and go through the shots and the appointments and and how sex is scripted, right? I mean, it becomes a whole, it's the luster of it loses its value, right? I mean, it's very very stale, like stagnant,
very
like
sterile,
sterile,
timed. Yeah.
And then you throw on top hormones in there, right? Hormones are no joke. I will say like I took Clomid for 3 months, I think. And 3 months was about much as I could handle. Like I can remember sitting at my office at work at my former job, like for 4 hours, like literally like all the trauma, like all the things that I thought I had forgotten about just came flooding. Wow. And I just sat there for 4 hours and emotionally paralyzed. And I'm texting my wife and like, I literally do not know what to do. Like I'm literally just stuck here. Like, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And partly I'm thankful for that experience because it made me realize that I have stuff that I still need to work on, right?
Yeah, a little self-awareness never hurt, right?
Right. But also, I didn't tell the doctor either. I thought that, what, if this is what I have to deal with, I'm going to suck it up and deal with it, because I didn't want to ruin our chances. Like I didn't want, if this was going to improve our chances, I didn't want to get in the way, be in the way of being successful. Right. And that was a huge thing for me. Look, when I was going through it was, being diagnosed with male infertility, I felt guilty. Like I felt guilty that I was the one getting in the way of her dream of becoming a mother. And that was a tremendous amount of guilt that I put on myself. And I've had to work through some of that, right? I mean, work through some of like, I didn't choose this. Right. Like I did not, there's no rhyme or reason for it.
Right.
So it's a lot of work, and it's easy to feel guilty like that when you see your partner like distressed because their work, right? They've just had their fourth baby shower of the year, and they're across the hall is like my wife's classroom, and the teacher's lounge is right across the hall. So every time they had a baby shower, it was like right there.
Punching her in the face. Wow.
Right. And she couldn't leave, right? She didn't have the luxury of being in social work where I would honestly purposely schedule home visits. Like, so I was out of the office in the community, like during that time.
Right.
Right. So you find like those little tricks, but that's not everybody's case. Everybody's, doesn't have a luxury of just leaving the office for a couple hours.
I want to come back to triggers in just a second, but I do consider myself a bit of a reference queen, and I also acknowledge that some of my references are nerdy or outdated. Like my favorite TV show is Matlock, and I'm pretty sure most of my listeners are like, "Who's Andy Griffith?" But are you familiar with Harry Potter at all?
Yeah, I know Harry Potter. I will be honest, I've not read the books or seen the movies, but I know Harry Potter.
Okay, so you won't understand this reference, but if you'll roll with me, because I'm going to finish it for the people who are listening, like, oh, here she goes again. So there's quickly for you, there's a creature called a Dementor, and it literally it sucks all the happiness out of you, and it leaves you with all of your negativity. And Clomid for you was your Dementor. But in real life, Harry Potter acknowledged that the wizarding world is not real.
Yeah.
That, to me, though, when you were describing that, I mean, that's almost exactly how they describe that in the book and in the films. And that's a really wild thing. And I don't know how much people it's shocking to me the lack of empathy people can have, even providers. I've had people who are obstetricians themselves say some of the most bonkers things to me. And I'm like, don't you do this for a living every day? How could you possibly think that that was something compassionate to say? It's wild, though. You're literally describing a pill that lived inside of you as a dementor, and you had no spell. Sorry for the Harry Potter metaphor getting dragged on, but to get rid of that. And you felt confined to that because you weren't aware, like, I don't want to take away our chances, and this medication is supposed to be the thing that fixes everything magically, so here we go. And I know I took Clomid for 6 months, and I know other people who've done it for even longer, and it's just a really wild thing. The hormones, the up, the down, the tracking, all of it, very, very difficult. So I really appreciate you sharing that, because again, I think the more and more that we hear that, especially from men, I think you're the third male identifying person that I've had on this podcast. So it's really nice to hear from people who've had a different view than what a lot of people have had. And then coming back to what you were talking about with the triggers, I mean, it's the wildest things. It's the smallest things. It's perhaps the thing is silly, not our triggered response to it is silly, but the thing itself might have been silly. That can just send us into an emotional tailspin, especially when it's blindsided. Like, oh, wow, I didn't really realize that finding out that a teacher down the hall from me is pregnant was going to make me want to sob in the janitor's closet for 5 minutes. Like, it's that sort of thing.
Yeah. And it's crazy, like how different like my wife's reactions to like pregnancy announcements and mine like were very drastically different. The announcements in itself for me wasn't really the hugest trigger for me. Not that I want people like to have like miscarriage or pregnancy loss. Like I really don't want that, but the reality of the pregnancy like had not hit me, if that makes sense. Right? I mean, somebody announces they're pregnant. Part of me in my head's like, okay, they're pregnant. Okay, I don't see them on a regular basis. Finding out was never the trigger for me, because, like I said, like ultimately was not in my reality at that point. And maybe that was a self-preservation factor, for me. But when like babies were born, that was the most difficult part, because then it became reality that here's somebody over that has been able to get pregnant on their own without help. And that's my assumptions, right? But here somebody is that's never struggled. Yeah. I for all of us that had experienced infertility, like we don't wish to struggle upon anybody.
No, absolutely not.
But when people understand it and get it, I mean, that's our community, right? I mean, like we build community through similar experiences. Yeah, a lot of our experiences are different in some levels, but when people get it, it is so validating. Like to be able to talk with somebody, it's like, oh yeah, man, like I went through that too. And to know that there's that mutual level of I get it.
Yes.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll say too is like how crazy it can be with triggers. I remember, like, this is a very funny story, which obviously if I wasn't in my right frame of mind, right? I mean,
right.
So we had just did our first transfer, and my wife had had read up all about like bromine and eating pineapple core and all that stuff, right? So we did our transfer, we were home, and she asked, can you give us pineapple? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So I went up and got to the fridge, opened the door, the glass bowl, right? Because we got rid of plastic, because plastics, or whatever. So
because everything is going to kill us, and everything is the one more reason why you are not having a baby. And people don't get this. You do anything that you think helps you to feel that small amount of control over helping yourself to have that little bit of edge into making it be this time. I'm with you. Get rid of the plastic. No, I'm not really. I'm kidding, but I'm with you.
Yeah. So I open the door. Out comes the glass dish with the pineapple in it and slides out and smashes on the floor. my instant thought was, oh crap, like I just messed this up. I'm going to fix this, right? But instead of going to the grocery store, which literally was maybe 7, 8 minutes from our house, that was it, right? I decided I was going to get most of the pineapple, put it in a bowl, wash it, and then give it to her to like, so she didn't know that like the thing just smashed on the floor. Right. I didn't want to stretch her out. So I was like, you know what? This is how I'm going to do it. I don't want to tell her I'm going to store. I'm literally just going to wash it. Right. Give her a bowl, and I sat down, and she takes one bite and she's like, why is this pineapple crunchy? And I'm just like, oh. And she's like, what happened? I'm like, I tried washing it and the glass shattered, and you probably are chewing on glass shards. Like we can laugh at it now, like, and like we joke that that was probably what made our transfer didn't work the first time, but um just that is literally the level of I need to fix this now,
Yeah.
like the control, right? You don't have like the slow down, let's think this through, let's just go to the store and buy a pineapple. It was make or break. This was going to make our transfer, or not, whether they need this, like, and that was my moment, right? And the whole journey, right? It, you literally are doing everything that you can to establish control. And I think some of that is a healthy way, right? I mean, some control, right? If you're thinking like, I really want to gain myself an edge on, all these results and stuff, like I'm going to, try to eat healthier, or I'm going to eat a healthier diet. I'm going to eat more vegetables and fruits. You know what? That's just going to help you overall, right? I mean, just eating healthier and eating better, right? And if working out, right? I mean, working out can be excessive. I'll give you that. But, one of those psychologists I'm connected with, so Angela Lawson is at Northwestern. She's like, if there's anything that you can do where to manage your stress, do it. If it means taking a supplement, even though there may not be evidence for that and it's not harming you, who cares? If it means that you are doing things whatever that you can do to help manage stress and controlling it, great. But remember though, stress doesn't cause infertility. That's the biggest thing, And I think a lot of times, like men, like I think, and women, feel like, when they don't have good numbers, or they almost like blame themselves, right? Because like, oh, I've just been too stressed, or I've been. If that was the case, I think the human species probably would be end, right? I mean, we wouldn't be here, if you think about the stress of every single day life, right? So, like I said, I'm in the camp where, stress doesn't inherently cause like infertility, but stress does play a factor in how you cope with the journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which comes back to, and again, I'm obviously biased being a therapist myself, but and I do also acknowledge the privilege that exists in being able to access mental health services in a number of areas, not the least of which the United States, but being able to get with somebody, checking with your insurance company, seeing what your agency, company, school, wherever you work offers. Even if it's employee assistance program, I think most of them offer like 6 weeks, 6 sessions, I should say, not weeks, 6 sessions. Of course, obviously, if you're able to pay out of pocket, and that works for you, that's an option as well. But being able to have that space for yourself, this 50 something minutes for me once a week, however often it is, where I can process through the things that are going on, because the non-birthing partner is so often overlooked. And yeah, you're right. And I can't speak from my own personal experience being the person with the uterus, but how hard it is, and knowing, how often your partner's going to the doctor and having things jammed inside of them and taking pills and having injections and all of the things, and the consistent loss, and, month after month, all of that adds up. And it's no one's place anymore to have to suck it up and get over it. We all deserve to take up some space in this fertility conversation. We all deserve support, connection, community. You mentioned that earlier too, feeling validated, feeling you're not isolated. It's not just you. It's a lot of people. And that validation can be so, so helpful in this process.
Yeah. And, like Brene Brown really says it best, and I forget like who else, because I want to say like somebody else has had like there was another like a Black woman's had this conversation prior to Brene Brown, so I want to acknowledge that too. But the reality is, it's like when stigma is there, right? The only way that we can like reduce stigma or get rid of it is by normalizing the situation, right? So we normalize that through conversation. For example,
Absolutely.
yeah. So, for example, like this last December, right before Christmas, like the garage door spring had busted, and I could not open like that. That is not a one person thing. I'm like, I'm not that handy. I will admit that. I can do basic stuff, but this was out of my realm, right? So, come home from Christmas and like I call person. The only thing, like I find the ad, right? Call him and comes out and comes and fix it, and I don't know what we were talking about, but somehow we got to talk about how like I was going back to school and you're going to be changing focuses and wanting to work in like reproductive mental health and all that. And he just started opening up and said like, yeah, like my wife, like, and I had a miscarriage. And he said like, it was tough. He said like, it was like one of the hardest things that I had gone through. And like he said like my wife was ready to start over again after like a couple of weeks, and he's like, "Are you nuts? Like I don't want to do this." And, like he was so fearful of what if this happens again, and and the emotions and like the ups, like said the ups and downs of saying, "Hey, we're pregnant," and then all of a sudden like, no, we're not, and he's like, "I wish I had somebody there to talk to about that."
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for, I think, people in our generations because our parents were never the ones to talk about it.
No.
They were that generation that like kept things, quiet, like, and at some level, like there's nothing wrong with reaching out to family, right? If that's what if that's what people choose. But I think social media has really amplified that, there are more than just your immediate circle, Mm-hmm. Reproductive medicine has only been here since what, 1978? 78 was when Louisa Brown in the UK was first born IVF. And then Elizabeth Carr was 1981 in the United States. So if you think about it, that's not that long ago.
Right.
Even though we may think it like, wow, like that was 30 some years ago. We were born, right? I mean, so they were coming in.
Not long at all, really.
No. So I think like it's an emerging field. And to highlight the male experience as well is there are less than 10 men in the entire country that specialize in reproductive mental health. Wow. Less than 10. There's probably, I think in the exact number is like 7.
Wow.
There could be some people that just don't, advertise about it, but of the people I know, there's 7, right? There's not a lot of men to be able to talk about the stuff with. So like even when we have and say like, hey, like we should really go to therapy, that's great. Like I completely agree. Like, but there are some things that men like want to talk to another man about it, or and especially if they've had experience, right? So I think it's a larger issue with getting men to be, in and getting involved in this space as well. And I think it's getting there, but there's definitely some room for improvement.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, look at, not that social work is the only place for mental health, but that's my area. So, yeah. I mean, the percentage of men to women ratio is not indicative of the rest of the KU campus or any other campus where I've been. And it really is interesting. And I can't speak for, professional counselors or marriage family therapists, but I can say for sure in social work. And And that obviously goes even further into perinatal mental health and fertility and that sort of specialty. Also, I know we had the Postpartum Support International national meeting for the United States here in Kansas City. Not very many men, right? So I think as we continue to deconstruct gender as identity versus gender as dress up. I just got a new dissent pin that literally says gender is dress up because, we're all born naked and the rest is drag. And if you believe in Adam and Eve, Adam didn't walk out of the Garden of Eden in pleat front khakis and boat shoes. And if you don't believe Adam and Eve, then also you're rolling your eyes along with me either way. But all that to say that you can't wear this dress I'm wearing and I can't wear your striped shirt is just a social construct. And the fact that people have grown up having a penis and thinking that that's women's work, we're getting away from that. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Literally, you and I right now, go us. That's what we're trying to do right now, is to get away from that helping profession isn't for a man, and this is men's work, and this is women's work. And we still have a long way to go in that. We have a long way to go in decreasing stigma, but look at you just mentioning that, and you creating, just even having your vibe, I guess, that this person fixing your garage door was like, let me tell you about my fertility struggles. I recently started Lexapro, and I've just been, I just say that out loud. I couldn't, it's no, I always tell my clients, it's nothing to be ashamed of, and it's nobody's business. So wherever you want to fall on that spectrum, for me, I'm like, oh yeah, I just started Lexapro and blah, blah, blah. And it's been really invigorating for me because I've had so many people who are like, oh, me too. Or, oh, I started Zoloft a year ago. It's been amazing. Or this or that or whatever. Obviously speak to your psychiatrist. Everybody go get your psychiatrist, right? I'm not prescribing medication. So, and obviously I have this show. I'm a social worker. So I sit in a place of privilege with that. But it's really nice for me. I have no shame or fear of being able to say that. I have no shame or fear in being able to talk about my fertility struggles. I definitely feel like I did more when I was going through them. And I definitely know that we have historically received messages that, especially for people with a uterus, like that is your job in life, is to recreate life. That's your job. Because that is literally what we did back in the day, not in the 80s, but like, and to be able to have our bodies not be able to do that. I've talked with a lot of clients, I've talked to guests on my show, like that you feel like a failure, but that's what we're continuing to work on as well. We are more than our body's ability to reproduce, and whether or not we think that ourselves, we are hearing those messages sometimes, and we're really fighting against that. And that's what I'm really happy to have you here to be able to talk to about, like, not just for birthing people, it's for everybody.
And I mean, I can honestly say, like, that was, I mean, something that, like honestly, like I struggled with, was, the infertility pieces. I had low sperm count, and it was hard for me. Like, it was hard for me to fathom, like, why. Like, I kept on asking myself, why? Like, why do I have low numbers? Why? And really, there's no research. Like, there's very little research on male reproductive health in general. But like, I didn't have those answers. I didn't have the answer of, like, why. I've been told my whole life that getting pregnant is super easy and it can just happen one time.
Yes, right? Which is true. Everybody practice safer sex choices for those of you who may be fertile, but you don't know these things, and you spend so much time trying to not get people pregnant, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh.
But it also, like, instills this narrative that it's supposed to be easy.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
And like, that's a problem, right? I mean, it's literally gone from 1 in 8, right? 1 in 8 to now 1 in 6, right? So the numbers
we're getting more numbers. We're more aware of it. People are reporting it more. People are seeking treatment, whereas before we just didn't talk about it. We didn't know.
And I think that's a lot that's not reported.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if you think about it, how many people that are maybe low socioeconomic status, right? How many of them are actually going to say, like, oh, let me do IVF?
Right.
They can't. It's a matter of affordability, and that's a whole nother episode of access, right?
Yes.
But there are so many populations that aren't even part of that conversation. And if you think about even the LGBT, Q plus community, that's not even part of the statistics, right? They utilize fertility treatments because of the different gametes, right? I mean, like they don't have the two parts, right? So they have to do either, for a same-sex relation for cisgender men, they have to use a surrogate because they obviously can't carry one unless, they're, transgender, from female to male. I mean, there's that, but they have to utilize that, women in same-sex relationships, right, have to utilize sperm donor, right? It's cheaper than surrogacy, where surrogacy is about $80,000 to $200,000, right? So you think about access, and even when those LGBTQ, like even when they have mandated coverage, because they don't have the quote unquote parts, right? The legislation says that they don't have access. It's gotten better. It has, but once I got into this and realized, I'm like, this is right up social work's alley. Like, this is macro, this is meso, this is micro. I mean, this is what we do, right? Like, we advocate for change. Like, we get people to have access, right? And I'm not one to push you should just do IVF. No, I mean, but I feel like everybody should have the ability to make that choice.
That's
right?
it. And that's it right there. Yes.
So it's not about some people may not believe in IVF, right? I mean, they might have whether that's their religious, affiliation or whatever, their own personal feeling. Some people may not want to do IVF. Some people may want to adopt. And the one thing I'll say about that is that adoption costs just as much as IVF.
Adoption is preposterously expensive in the
United States. And I think people think it's just free for the taking. No, it's a process. But yet, once again, people should be able to have the choice. They shouldn't be our only choice is adoption.
Yes.
We have to do this, right? I mean, people should have the choice. I mean, there are so many different levels that social work can be a part of. Whether that's in a perinatal clinic. I literally, I don't know if you're familiar with the podcast All in the Mind. Have you ever listened to that?
Yes, yeah.
Did you listen to the latest one about the male experience of perinatal mood disorders?
I have not heard that one yet. I'm going to write it down right now.
Okay. So that one I think just came out this week. And it just made me smile. Not that I want a guy go through that, but just the awareness, right? I mean, to bring this to say perinatal mood and anxiety disorders aren't for women. Women obviously have that, right? But the guy talked really about I don't remember the exact specifics, but he talked about how when his son was born, he had his own trauma history with his dad and stuff like that. He didn't get to hold the baby. And he said that, the baby, I don't know if he saw it and then was whisked away and stuff. And then his wife was whisked away. And he's I'm left there with getting robbed of an experience, and had some depression and some anxiety and stuff about that. And, worried about that, his dad, like I said, had a trauma history. His dad's relationship was pretty, toxic and was not great. And those thoughts of man was am I just going to be like my dad? Am I going to screw him up? Am I going to have, am I going to put my kid through the same thing? So men will think about that. They'll think about their own, childhoods and stuff and worry about what's my capacity to be a father. Right. And I think those are very healthy questions to ask. Yeah. But in some ways that can lead to depression and stuff. And especially when you're just you feel you've been robbed of an experience of being able to hold your son, right after. It makes a world of a difference. Think about how the difference maker that could have been, just to be able to hold his son, right?
Absolutely.
And not only that, but my wife and I were successful, right? We did 2 transfers. Our first one didn't work. And I can still remember the exact, location of where I was when I heard that. I was driving, and I can still remember it. And that was probably the hardest part. That was like the bottom of the barrel for me. I, at that point, had stopped caring. I didn't care about work. I didn't care. I was just numb. Didn't, and part of that, like I said, we knew that the chances of our first one being successful, was, a smaller percentage. But when you hear that news, there's nothing like it, of saying
there is also that stigma with IVF that IVF equals baby. And so when you get to that space, even they can tell you whatever the statistics are.
Yeah.
Also that hope, not that hope's a bad thing. This is the whole conversation though. How much do you have hope? We're cautiously optimistic. That's a very common, right? But you want to be excited. And then for me, I remember with the second time I got pregnant, I said, because the very first time I got pregnant, we FaceTimed everyone. And then, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, I had pregnancy loss. So then the second time my husband was like, well, I don't want to tell anybody. And I was like, I hear you. You're not wrong. Here's my thought. I'm going to tell a lot of people if I have a pregnancy loss, why not at least let them get excited with us for a little bit if it ends up like that. We eventually ended up not telling people, and I had to tell them I had a pregnancy loss. But that really is it, right? You hold on to that hope and whatever that looks like. You wouldn't do it if you didn't think it was going to work. And then you get this phone
Right.
call and you're driving.
Yeah, it's walking the wire of what do you call that thing between the high wire, right? I mean, the high wire, right? You're balancing the high wire of infertility, right? To the right, you have all the hope, right? And all the hope and all the wishes and everything there. And then to the left, whatever is despair, right? And it's all the what ifs, the trauma, all the losses, and the losses of not just infertility, of pregnancy loss, the losses of having to do this, to do IVF, to be able to have kids naturally, to miss those pregnancy announcements. And there's so much nuance, however, in it. But you're literally walking on this tightrope between despair and hope. Because if you lean too much in hope, you're going to fall off, right? And then you're going to have disappointment. But then if you lean too much to the left, you can't hope. So you're stuck in this balancing act of ambiguity and wanting to be hopeful, but then not wanting to be too hopeful, because if you're too hopeful, that means it's not going to happen. And I think that's a hard thing for people to get.
Yes, it's very, very, it's all very difficult. And that's why it's so nice to be able to have these conversations for people who are out there, because like you said, 1 in 6 people, everyone listening to the show, I would say almost obviously, not necessarily, but almost everyone listening to this show, it's called the Perinatal Podcast, but everyone probably knows somebody who has some sort of fertility issue or whatever that looks like, and probably knows somebody even closer to them. And so how can we be more compassionate in allowing space and vulnerability and conversations and communication so that people don't feel isolated, so that people don't feel alone, that they don't have to have walked this journey in this tightrope or this high wire all by themselves in a way. And so that's what's so helpful for these conversations and sharing, in making it more aware, and again, too, like you were talking about the injustice that we experience with same-sex couples or queer couples, and the legislation that goes with that. Certainly, I know people are trying to make IVF illegal in a number of states, which blows my mind. Gestational surrogacy just became legal in New York State a year ago, sometime this year even. I gotta tell you what, it's 2023 right now at the time of recording. Time still has no meaning for me post quarantine. I'm like, was that last week? Was that last year? I'm not sure. But
the only thing to say was in Michigan, it is compensated surrogacy is still illegal. And one of my sister-in-law's really good friends was a surrogate, and her whole family was from the UP. And UP meaning Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
So that's the Upper Peninsula for those of you
Yeah.
not from the Midwest.
So we call ourselves Upers. So like my whole family's from like the Marquette area and stuff. So
Yeah.
if you ever get a chance to go up there, it's definitely beautiful. But during her third trimester, though, like she did not go into Michigan because if they found out that she was compensated, she could actually be jailed and be charged with felony.
That was the largest eye roll in the history of mankind. For those of you not watching on YouTube, that's
so a lot of times when I do talks, like when I very briefly touch upon like just like the different treatments, right? And when I bring that up, I always ask. And the funny thing is that they're not that I want it, but I think it's funny to make people uncomfortable. But when I asked the question of, do you think compensated surrogacy should be allowed? And like people like have not really had to sit and think with that, right? And think about like what, like I don't have an answer because I never really looked into that. When you think about what a surrogate puts like in like her body, like there is the risk of her having like her or they, right? I mean, the birthing partner, they have the risk that they could have pregnancy complications that could inevitably make them infertile, right? Or have like being able to have like if ectopic pregnancy. I mean, that's even now so, like with legislation with abortion access and all that. So it's always mind blowing, when people like, I've never thought about that. But yet every single time that I have brought up, and like, is this more, like I said, my last job, when I found out that we don't talk about this stuff in our education, it was mind blowing to me. And I started asking why, right? And I did a very non-scientific poll on Reddit and asked in the social work, right? In the social work group, right? How many of you have had, conversations about infertility and mental health, like in your classes? And of the 225 people that took that poll, 92.7% said no.
Yeah.
So then I started.
I'm 0% shocked.
Right. So I started asking coworkers, right? I mean, they've all either had social work, psychology, some sort of mental health, right? Counseling, right? And I started asking them, and like, did you ever talk about this stuff in your school? And they're like, no. But then through our conversations, like I found out that someone was a surrogate, right? Or someone had male factor infertility. Someone had multiple miscarriages, right? We all knew somebody. Somebody could name at least one person that's had a struggle, whether they personally had it or so-and-so's sister was a surrogate, right? Or whatever, or somebody's going through IVF, right? I did like a talk with a foster care unit, like at my work, and people might think of like, what in the heck? Like, why would you do a talk on infertility at foster care? Because adoptive parents are 10 times more likely to have gone through fertility treatments. And 39% of foster parents said their motivation to become a foster parent was because of infertility. So if you have a narrative that getting pregnant is super easy, and then you come into foster parents where like that they're motivated to be there, but yet have not actively grieved the loss of having their biological children, right? I mean, like there's so much to it. I also don't feel like I took a class and like it was like foster care and family work, and the professor said that there's a lot of counties, whether at least in Wisconsin, that will just be a blanket no, for anybody that has infertility. And I'm like, that to me, it's not fair. Like that, it's not fair.
It's a really interesting exclusionary criteria.
Right. And I'm like, I had a guest on like my podcast, which is merging now with our nonprofit, but like he did foster care. Like they didn't do IVF, they didn't do any fertility treatments. I think like his wife had like a risk of cancer and stuff. So they're like, no, we don't want to risk it. So like they did the whole foster to adopt route. And the initial, like they weren't initially going to adopt, but the foster care workers like, you may want to check, fosters who adopt, just in case you have the opportunity. You don't want to have to go back and redo trainings and all that stuff. I'm like, so he's like, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll do that. I'm not expecting it. And now they have 2 kids, right? That they've adopted out of foster care. So, but I will say like that he's had like the most healthiest approach like to infertility. Like they grieved, right? He's flat out said like we went to Disney World of all places to be like our last kind of like our
Yes.
closure, right?
Yeah.
So he said part of it was them seeing that all the parents struggling with their toddlers and all of that and stuff. Like it's like I get it, like I have twin boys that are going to be 5 in November. So like I'm like I get people laughing at that,
Yeah.
So, but a very like healthy approach to it. So I think people can. And I know like that I had read some research by Brennan Peterson, and there was 2 other gentlemen that were on that research article. They did like the infertility resilience model. And it was such a different and novel approach to it, because when you think about research with infertility, right, it's all been negative. It's all been depression, anxiety. Natalie Domar from Boston IVF's done phenomenal work. Absolutely. I've got to meet her a handful of times and just in awe of her work. But she did research in 93 that basically showed like she compared the psychological distress between somebody who is experienced or got diagnosed with HIV, with cancer, like cardiovascular, like heart attack, and infertility. And she compared them, right? And the psychological distress of receiving a cancer diagnosis and receiving an infertility diagnosis, not together, but like separately, right? The psychological distress were not statistically different.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I think that's mind blowing to people, because people will say like, oh, like, well, cancer, like you can't die from infertility. And I'm like, that's a very invalidating statement,
Hello, we're not doing the trauma Olympics. What did we already say, team?
Right. So we
also talk about the death of a dream, though. And that is a very valid thing as well, especially for people like, there are people who genuinely have known since they were kids that they wanted kids.
Yeah.
And when you just go through life, I mean, what happens when you assume, but when you go through life assuming you'll have kids, and then you meet someone or you don't, however whatever your journey is of having children, and you get to the space where you're excited to try to have children, and then to be able to hold, it's just not going to happen. How invalidating that must be for somebody to be like, oh, well, at least you can't die. I'm like, well, don't say at least, but yes. Yeah. I'm so with you.
I mean, the part of it though, too, like I kind of throw out there though, and being that I think it's September Suicide Awareness Month, right?
Yes.
I think so. I mean, to throw this out there, like there was some research done in 2016 that showed that 43% of women that have gone through IVF, like in this research, out of like 43% had suicidal ideation.
Mm-hmm.
And of that 43%, like 9.2% were considered high risk.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's
it does happen. But yet,
yes, it does.
As clinicians, we don't ask about infertility or miscarriage in the intake.
Mm-hmm.
We don't ask about that, unless they're specifically there for that specific purpose.
Right.
But if you're meeting with adult clients that are of reproductive age, why not ask? And if they say no, then that's what it is, right? But if some people say yeah, I've tried to be, pregnancy has never happened. I had a client that was adopted in my last job, and I was the only one to ask the question of, did the parents, were they child-free by choice?
Mm-hmm.
And then this, kid came, basically their grandnephew came into their life, right? And they decided yeah, okay, we'll change their mind. Or was it that they were child-free not by choice and an opportunity came up? Mm-hmm. And so there's that is two completely different mindsets, right?
Yes.
at social work, like we should be talking about that, right? We should be thinking about it.
Yes.
I have a client that I worked with, transgender male and PCOS. And the funny thing is when we were having these conversations about like the different medical stuff, and they were shocked that I knew what PCOS was. I knew that there was risk for, gestational diabetes. There's also a risk for depression and anxiety, like there's mental health risks and other thing. And they're looking at me like, how the heck do you know this?
Yeah.
I'm like, I have my own podcast on the side, and I literally had a doctor that specializes, like we literally had an episode on PCOS.
Yeah.
And like I said, like I love doing like podcasts because it's a learning thing, right? Like we all learn from somebody. It's I don't know, it's been my favorite thing to do is like doing podcasts and stuff. But I think knowing, like what is PCOS, what is endometriosis, like when we're working with clients, it's holistic care, right? We need to be able to know about some of these things. Like we don't have to be an expert, and we can know when we say, like, you know what, we bow out. This is not our expertise. Maybe we should go to endocrinologist or whatever,
Right.
But having that awareness of like, what is that like? And it was a conversation that like I had with my clients said, just because you have PCOS does not mean that you will never, ever be able to have children. And I said, like, I know you're 17 and that's the farthest thing from your mind right now. But at some point, like you may want that, right? And, like you may want to have like your own kid someday. I said, and you may not. That's completely your choice. But just telling you that just because you have PCOS doesn't mean like you can't.
Right.
Because there's that misconception, like, oh, PCOS, like that's like, no, it's not a death sentence, but like you're going to have a lot of struggle. And that might be true, but there are people that have had children.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing that because you're right. Like we just don't learn a lot about that, even as mental health professionals. And again, we're evangelizing the stories here. We're letting people know, and like you said too, becoming more competent in it, being humble and asking, being willing to do some Googling and read people's research on it, and make yourself more aware. And like I said, the whole goal, being compassionate to one another and taking care of each other. So to that end, how do we help take care of each other? Where can everybody find you? I'm going to put it in the show notes, of course, but I want to let all the listeners know where they can find you, where they can get connected to all of the things we've been talking about.
Yeah, so I'm primarily on Instagram and LinkedIn are probably like the two biggest platforms. Instagram, like the handle is sjmiller2024, and LinkedIn, I think it's just Stephen Miller, which I know is a very common name. But yeah, I mean, Instagram probably is like the best, way to reach out, or LinkedIn. I can like give you the email too. So like it's Stephen@menshelpline.org. Yeah, so we're excited to get, program up and running, getting some of our campaign to reduce stigma. And biggest thing right now is getting the fundraising and getting that. And so any help in that with listeners, if you feel like that's something you want to contribute to, like definitely connect me. And
yes, throw some coin their way.
All right, and like I said, our thing, our peer-to-peer like network, it's gonna make some changes, I think, and changing the way that men get approached for infertility, like in loss. I mean, one of my really good friends, him and his mom, unfortunately now ex-wife, they had 5 miscarriages like in a row, and he said every single time we were rushed out the back door. And he's like, I hated that. Like he was almost like shunned. And like we were like something like we just got out the back door. And I think in some level, like they wanted to be respectful of the couple, right? But that respectfulness led to more like alienation, right? And isolation and shame almost, So I think there's a lot of things that we can do, like within clinics, that could be changed as well. I think asking men, like separately from their partners, because I guarantee that like there's not going to be one guy that's going to say like, "Yep, I'm struggling," in front of his wife. There might be. I'm not going to say 100%, but
Well,
often
we open the space for that. Here
right.
right now in this moment, not that you need our permission, but Stephen and I are opening the space for you to do that. But I acknowledge also, like, it's hard not to do the comparison game when you're not being poked and prodded and stuck in as much, at least.
Right.
But the communication piece, we don't suffer in silence anymore.
Yeah. Opening space for like the men to even just one-on-one just talk and say like, even just ask how are you doing really?
Yes.
And not don't like take the mask off, let them talk, and I think the other thing that I've also like learned in my experience is one of my good colleagues, Dr. Bill Peacock, phenomenal psychologist out in Baltimore, and has been in this field since like 1985 or 87 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a long time. And he said the one thing that he does, like when he, talks with, other, like identifying men, right, is never talk about sharing it. Like, what are your feelings or what are your thoughts? Like, what are your feelings about that? What are your emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't talk about the emotion and feelings, but like if you ask him, it's like, what's your experience been like?
Yeah.
Opens up a whole like, and what really happens is that he talks about the emotions and feelings, but like just the question of just like, what's your experience been like?
Yep.
He can describe that, right? It's like it sucks, right? It sucks seeing that my wife coming home from a day of teaching and they've had their third baby shower and her just sobbing on the floor, like, and really for men, like that's a helpless feeling.
Yeah.
You can't fix it. Like we are ones that we want to fix everything, and this is something we can't fix.
Right.
And that's hard.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, to sit with that knowing like there's absolutely nothing that I can do to make this better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So
And getting that support and opening up that space for conversation and validation and connection doesn't necessarily produce us a baby, but it does help us to feel supported and seen and taken care of, and helps create that bond.
Right. And overall benefits the couple.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wow. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Everyone, please go check the show notes. I'm going to have all of this contact information. Check it out. Share the word. Somebody who's experiencing fertility struggles, pregnancy loss. Somebody. You may be that person. Please use it yourself. If not, please share it. That's the whole point of this, is to help people to feel that connection. So everyone out there, stay curious, not judgmental. Goodbye.